is from a small community in southern Utah by the name of Fillmore. My wife and I used to live there. In fact, I taught school there and had some familiarity with Jered's mother.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that he was her son when Jered came here, so we got acquainted. Jered has also taught in the public schools. He's done some very interesting research, including but not limited to his dissertation, and he's also been doing some teaching while he's been here at IP&T. I think you'll find his research very interesting, and since this is a pre-dissertation defense, you can query him after he presents, okay?
That's good.
Very good.
So one thing I'm doing is looking for jobs. So when you, is anyone looking to be a faculty or faculty positions after a couple of you? So you do that, you have to teach. And so I've been presenting this presentation quite a bit. And at the end of one of them, they said, you know, you spelled there wrong. So if you see any typos or anything, let me know, because I'm probably still going to use this. So I'm really going to talk about three things: types, subjects, and dimensions of online learner interactions. So my research has been going on here at BYU as part of the Tech Integration course, and then also at the Open High School of Utah, which is now Mountain Heights High School. They just changed their name last week. But I'll start with some of my dissertation research. To kind of give you a background of online learning, I think we're all familiar with the growth of online learning. BYU is a little different, but a lot of the programs, pretty much all the jobs I'm applying to, it's all online, or most of it is online. So that's really the movement of even grad school. And you can see, I really like this table, or this figure, because it shows you that the percentage of total enrollments is growing. You can see the same type of thing right now. About 5% of high school students have taken an online class, and estimates range from about 600,000 to 2 million students are participating. So it's kind of all over the map, and we don't know exactly where it is. But what's clear is that online learning is growing in higher ed and in K-12. So when you look at K-12, one thing you need to realize is that online learning has a higher attrition rate, which is really scary when you look at the current face-to-face dropout rate or attrition rate in schools isn't really the gold standard to begin with, right? The bar isn't that high. And so when you look at these two trends, that online learning tends to have a higher attrition rate and is growing quickly, it's really something that we need to address, and it's critical that we look at this. So why do students fail to persist? We looked at the literature and found a few reasons. Lack of prompt feedback, unclear instructions, sense of isolation, lack of community, absence of personal contact. Essentially, we can group those together as there's a lack of quality human interaction. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the NCAA. A couple of years ago came out and basically said that if online courses don't have a high level of instructor-student interaction, then they called it academically unsound, and their future athletes could not enroll in courses that are independent study courses. So I know a few programs, including independent study here, is try to address this issue. So I'm going to start with the types and subjects of interaction in online charter school. I did the multiple article dissertation format, so 2 of them are in print or in press right now. So are you guys familiar with Moore's types of interactions? So Moore came up with 3 types of learner interaction, and what's funny is it was like an editorial piece in the American Journal of Distance Ed, but it's cited hundreds, if not thousands of times. I mean, you see it all over the place because it's really a helpful framework to examine interactions. So he said that we have learner-instructor interaction. We have learner-learner interaction and learner-content interaction. So when he developed this, he was really thinking of it in the higher ed level, but who's missing from this framework? If you think of K-12 learning, or high schoolers, or elementary school students.
Parents.
Yeah, so where are the parents, right? So One thing that we're really interested at is looking at learner-parent interaction and then parent-instructor interaction. So that top triangle is something that we're really interested in looking at, and frankly has been ignored in the literature. So just looking at the types of interaction isn't enough. We're interested in the subjects of interactions. So you look at this table, I try to group them together. There haven't been a lot of people that have identified the subjects of interaction. But here you have pedagogical interaction, instructional interaction. Essentially all these types of interactions dealt with the content. And then over here you have social. They called it all social except for supportive. And this, you'll notice this was done here by Abby Hawkins, who now works, where does she work?
Adobe.
I think she left Adobe. And then you have managerial interactions, and this is like, when is the assignment due? How long does the paper have to be? How do I turn it in? And we've grouped technological interactions with this too. So it's like, I can't get my video to work, or my computer's having problems, that sort of thing. So when we look at this, when we're looking at the human interaction, we're also looking at the subjects of what they're interacting about. So our research questions, essentially we wanted to measure the quantity and the perceived quality of these interactions, and then also correlate it with course outcomes. So who knows about the Open High School of Utah? Kind of, and you know because of your work with Dr. Wiley, I'm assuming the same. No? How are you familiar with it?
We actually wrote some open source content.
Oh, good, good. So it's called the Open High School of Utah because they use open educational resources, right? Which is why Dr. Wiley is so interested in that. And he was really the founder of this. But it's also received recognition for the teachers as well as the content, both locally and nationally. So it's done quite well. And students tend to succeed state averages on that. It's a full-time program, which is helpful as well. When you look at the demographics, so you'll notice that the green is national K-12 population, and then the red is national online student population. You'll see that there are some significant differences in some key demographics. But when you look at open high school with online students nationally, the disparity isn't so great. So one advantage of looking at this is it's similar to other online programs. Why it was really appropriate for this research is they have a high level of interaction. So they really work hard to prepare quality content using open educational resources. But what's really interesting about their learning model is they have lots of human interaction. So teachers have 4 hours of office hours every day where students can contact them and communicate synchronously. Also, teachers are proactive in contacting students, and if you have taken an online course, that's not always the case. Also, they provide students with a social network so that they can interact with each other, so they have that environment. And they facilitate that with some face-to-face activities as well. All parents are involved in a parent organization, so that's kind of required. So that isn't so impressive that all of them are part of it. But I think what is impressive is 40% volunteer at the school. So I taught high school. I could not say 40% of parents volunteered at my school. And parents are relatively satisfied, 95% overall satisfaction. This is an internal evaluation, so that could have some response bias as well, obviously. So this is really survey research. We tried to do a mixed methods, and teachers were supposed to have been recording their interactions in their learning management system. But when we got in there, it wasn't as robust as we were hoping, so we kind of had to not use that. So we really relied on surveys to measure the quantity and quality of interactions, and then also measure some course outcomes. So we administered the survey to a 9th grade English class 1 year, because English had all the students, and then we did the same the next year, the same course, different teacher. And our response rate was almost 33%, which was lower than we were expecting because we really had administrator support. But we had to have a paired parent survey and student survey, so that reduced our numbers quite a bit. One thing to note about the limitations of the survey is we were asking them the minutes and hours that they were spending in these different types of interactions, and then we asked them what percentage of that time is spent on different subjects. When we were looking at course outcomes, we did not use scales to measure the course outcomes. We asked them single questions to measure it. One reason why we did that is the instrument would have been really, really long, and we had to really limit the size of the instrument that we were using for these students. So this is reported by parents. This is not too surprising, right? Most of their time spent in interactions were spent with their student or their child. However, they did have quite a high level of interaction with the instructor. One thing that you should notice, though, is that the standard deviation was quite large, right? So this varied across the map. And if you look at that, 40% reported no interaction with the instructor, and then 6% reported no interaction with their student, which we thought was kind of strange. But there was a large group that had no interaction with the instructor, which is important to note, and why we have such a large standard deviation. So this was students, what they reported. Again, you're seeing the same types of standard deviation, so it's kind of all over the map, which really reflects the flexibility of online learning. But if we kind of rank ordered this, it's not surprising that learners spend most of their time interacting with the content. The content is always there, it doesn't get tired, right? So that's really foundational to their educational experience. And then when you look at who's next, it's really with their parents, which again isn't too surprising because you've got 1 or 2 parents to 1 student, and they're probably there more than anyone else as well. And then we go down to learner, and then at the very end was with their instructor. And you'll see that, again, the skewness and the standard deviation, and we saw kind of the same type of thing here where 17% reported no learner-learner interaction. And then there was another group that reported over 3.5 hours of interaction with their peers. So again, they had that social network. So some students used it and some students didn't. So a few things about this. So this is grouping it by the subject. A few things that we were surprised about. Let's just look at learner-instructor interaction first. Most of their interaction was with procedures, how long is this paper, when is it due, that sort of thing. That doesn't require a knowledge of the content, right? So only 42% of their time was spent interacting about the content. And they're the only content experts, which we're kind of surprised about. If you look at parents, you see that it's almost a mirror image, right? So here we have 40% of the content from parents. So 40% of their time interacting with students was about the content. And they're not content experts, right? So we're kind of surprised about that. One kind of takeaway that we thought of from this is that there's got to be a way to reduce the procedural interactions from teachers. So that could be a school facilitator that can provide them with that information so they can contact them where they're not as expensive, and maybe instructors can use their time, focus more on the content. And parents as well, it feels like we need to provide them some training with the content as well, provide them access to the content if they're spending that much time with their students. Okay, educational value. So one thing that we found was learner was at the bottom, right? Which isn't too surprising because we just saw that most of their interaction was social. So that's not surprising that that is considered the less valuable of the types of interaction. One thing that we thought was interesting was that there's a significant difference between, so this is parents and this is students. Students valued their interactions with their parents more than their parents thought that their interaction with their students was valuable. So So one takeaway from that could be that parents don't fully understand their educational role or the value that they have in helping their students.
So Jered, are
Yeah.
those means?
Yeah, those are means. So we also correlated this. Again, we have the inputs and outputs, so the types of interactions and the subjects of interactions. And then also some of the outcomes that we're looking at was student-reported learning, course satisfaction, improved disposition. So did they like the content more before or after the course? And then also parent-reported student learning and course satisfaction. And student grade is what we obtained from the Open High School. So this is everything that has to do with a parent. So you kind of isolated this. To kind of orient you a little bit. Here are the types of interaction down here, and then these are the reported outcomes. What are some things that you notice? Okay, so we have a lot of negative correlation all along here, right?
But they're all very small.
Yeah, none of them, even the ones that are significant, I mean, the R-squareds are quite low, right? Which was kind of surprising to us. So if you look at this, although these aren't significant, one thing that you could think of is, you know, parents should stop interacting with their learners. Maybe that would be valuable, right? So you're smiling. What would be another explanation? Or can anyone think of other explanations for that?
Or the low correlation.
Or the negative correlations, or low. I mean, so we could look at this and think, well, parents are hurting their students by interacting with them.
So you've got on the one hand, you've got a 6-point item, is that right?
Yeah.
With the items scaled, you indicated the outcomes were a single question.
Yeah, so the outcomes were a single question, and then as far as measuring the types of interaction, we measured the quantity, so the hours and minutes that they reported spending on these types of subjects of interaction. Yeah.
I mean, students who struggle get more parent attention.
Yes.
And that seems like a pretty
Say
reasonable
that
alternative.
again.
Students who struggle get more parent attention, rather than parent attention causes students to struggle. It might be the inverse could be true.
Yeah, so if we draw this down, that's exactly kind of what we're thinking, is that parents, again, we saw before that they may not fully understand the educational value of their interactions, and so they may not get involved until there's a problem. So essentially, it could be that they're just putting out fires. So they see that their students' grades drop, and so then they're going to spend a lot of time with them. It could be the same thing with learner-instructor interaction. We see that it isn't really significant at all. Even the ones that are significant, the explained variance is quite low with those. So it could be that instructors are also spending a lot of their time with students that are struggling. And if there's a high level of those types of interactions, then this is what we'd expect to see, or even negative correlations. If that makes sense. But then if we look down here, remember that learners reported that their interactions with their peers was not as valuable as their interactions with parents and instructors. And yet this is where we're really seeing the significant correlations with everything, with grades, course satisfaction, improved disposition, parent perceived learning, and course satisfaction as well. So we don't know what the cause of that is, except that it could be really that learner engagement is correlated with learner-learner interaction because it wasn't required. So if they're engaged in the course, then they're going to be spending more time interacting with their peers. And if they're engaged in the course, then they could also be having higher course outcomes. If that makes sense, yeah.
There's also some literature out there, I read it recently, I can't remember what it was, that talks about how learners tend to do better while learning with other people that are struggling with them.
Yeah, so kind of that constructivist
Yeah.
idea, yeah. We also see, you hear a lot about learner time on task, really see that here. And again, that may be, all this may be a reflection of the flexibility of online learning. So those that are struggling online are probably getting more attention from their parents and more attention from their teachers than you would typically find in a face-to-face environment that's less flexible. And the same thing with the content. Those students that are struggling are probably spending more time, and then those that don't need to spend as much time, they have the flexibility to spend less time on it. So that may be a reason why we're not seeing correlations there. The other thing that we thought of is that we were not using a very good framework, right? I mean, measuring minutes and seconds and hours of interactions, and according to their subject, was probably not a very good framework to use. Because think about what your parents did to help you in high school. Who had a supportive parent? Okay, what did your parents do for you?
They would just like help me with work, like if I was writing an essay and I got stuck, they would help me.
Okay, so sometimes they'd sit down and actually read your work, right?
Often. They would often read it, and they would also help me if I,
So that's a time-intensive thing, right? I mean, to read a paper. So if we're measuring the hours and minutes of your parents interacting with you or helping you with the course, there would be a lot regarding the content, right? What else do parents do? Yeah.
My parents supported me a lot through grounding and punishment.
Yeah. Okay, good. So how much time does it take to say, if you don't do this, you're grounded?
Not very. My
2
parents
seconds.
were awful.
You know?
I didn't even realize it till now.
So, I mean, there's certain things, like creating a culture doesn't necessarily, how do you quantify the time that takes? Or I knew that if I didn't get a B, I was in trouble, right? I just knew that. But how much, if you try to quantify that, how would you do that, right? So the whole idea of measuring minutes and hours is flawed. And we kind of see that with the correlations, right? So instead, we really want to look at the culture that's set, or how students perceive how parents and teachers are engaged in their learning, right? Because there's lots of other ways rather than speaking with you about the course content, subject, or social information, right? So there's different ways to do that. So one thing that I'm actually going to skip this. Actually, just quickly, one thing that we looked at was we needed a better framework. We looked at the frameworks that were developed for online learning. All of them were really developed for higher ed. And younger learners are not the same as adult learners, or even, I guess everyone here are adults, right? But like young adult learners. So a few reasons. One is they tend to have an external locus of control, right? They have lower metacognitive skills or self-regulation abilities, which is really critical in a more autonomous environment that we find online. And really, none of these frameworks address those key issues of the learner and the environment. And so one reason why we don't have a lot of literature is that we don't have a theoretical rationale. So one thing that we're trying to work on is that theoretical rationale. So again, we already talked about Moore's types of interactions. There's also Garrison's community of inquiry. Does that ring a bell? Maybe it would be better if I skip down to here. So Garrison's community of inquiry is really, really popular right now because it's one of the few frameworks that really explains how social interactions or social presence impacts cognitive presence or student learning outcomes. It also explains how teachers can set the climate for social presence to occur, but also for cognitive presence to occur by selecting the content and timeline and, you know, typical things that teachers do. But again, this was developed for higher ed, and they talk about learners, peers, and teachers, but what they don't talk about is parents, right? So that's a big gap that needs to be addressed here. So one thing that we did is we looked at K-12 parent frameworks that were out there that were developed for face-to-face context. The most famous is Epstein's framework, and what she did was basically grouped roles that parents had. So one is parenting, which is basically, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, kind kind of providing for students' basic needs. Communicating and responding when parents interact with them. I'm a multiple sneezer too, so.
But enforcement spread out.
Yeah. In fact, I sneeze so loud that my wife says, "Is that really necessary?" I'm like, "I can't help it." So kind of volunteering at school, supervising their learning at home, participating in the PTA and things like that, right? So she kind of grouped these different responsibilities of parents. There's another one, Hoover and Dempsey, that basically asks the question, why do parents become involved or why don't they become involved? And so part of this has to do with like self-efficacy and things like that. Parents' skills and knowledge, invitations and things like that, their demands on time and energy, right? And then also mechanisms for parental, or why their interaction, or when they intervene, why does it help? And so they identify a few reasons why it would help students in their learning. So one thing that we've done, and I won't go into detail on this, but we're trying to develop what's called the Adolescent Community of Engagement. So again, that's very similar to the Community of Inquiry by Garrison. We do that to kind of let people know this is similar, but we're building on to what they did, using the other parental frameworks that we found. And essentially what we say is that this triangle right here represents student engagement. We define that. But the area represents the quantity of engagement. So as parent engagement increases, that'll drag this triangle over so that it represents that parent engagement is correlated with student engagement, because the area of the triangle will increase and student engagement will increase. So to kind of give you a visual, so again, we believe that it's correlated with parent engagement, teacher engagement, and peer engagement, right? What we're doing right now is we've only looked at teacher engagement, and what we've done is we've interviewed teachers at the Open High School of Utah a couple times each, and we've coded that to try to identify elements of teacher engagement, ways that they can improve student learning. And those are the ones that we found. In the next month, we're going to be conducting interviews with parents and peers, and eventually what we want to do is create an instrument, basically. So use those qualitative findings to develop an instrument, and that will kind of open the door for lots of different types of research once we get that. Like we could correlate, you know, the primary hypothesis is these types of engagement are correlated. We could test that. And I really identify best practices, right? So, we're going to talk about dimensions of interaction, then I've got a little activity for you. So, do you guys get opportunities to teach at all, or courses?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. I would take advantage of that, and it's also a great opportunity to conduct research, right? So these articles were really from a class that I taught, and I was taking some courses at the time. So instead of analyzing fake data, I collected data from my courses, did the IRB, and then wrote the papers. So it took a little more work than what the courses were asking, but then it resulted in some publications, right? So if you have that opportunity, I would think about it and work on that. So if you look at the dimensions of interaction, so we have space, time, fidelity. So with space, obviously we're all here, right? So it's live, physical, face-to-face. You don't have a lot of flexibility. You can't be in New York. Well, we are recording it, right? So someone could be in New York and watch this. So, but then over here, with online learning, you have more flexibility in space, right? Also in time, you have synchronous communication, so you all had to be here at 12 o'clock, right, ready to go. And that's what it is with face-to-face. But online, you can have asynchronous communication, so you can communicate at a time that's easiest for you. And then you also have to look at fidelity. So right now, we have all senses, right? So very high fidelity, but then you could just communicate with text, right, which is very low. So are you ready for this awesomeness? Watch this. I moved it gets cooler. So that's really face-to-face interaction. And typically with online, that's what we're looking at. So they're kind of mirror images of each other. So we have lots of flexibility in space and time, but for the most part, we're using text online. So one way to address that, some people have used synchronous video. Has anyone participated in a course like that where y'all get on the computer at the same time and then the teacher teaches? I just taught that way for the first time last week on a campus interview. It was like the worst type of instruction. I didn't like it. But it is a way for them to know that you're real, and you could respond to some students sometime. But one thing that I think is really valuable about online learning is that flexibility issue. So how do we maintain the flexibility and increase the fidelity? So some people have used audio to do that with some positive effects. What we wanted to do was increase that even more from audio and use asynchronous video. So like digital dialogue has a video feature, so asynchronous video feature. So we've used digital dialogue, we've used YouTube. VoiceThread, has anyone used VoiceThread? It's kind of cool if you go to voicethread.com. Essentially, you can create a presentation, upload it there, and then people can post comments around. So this is my icon image, and if you click it, then you see the video of me talking. The problem is it's not actually threaded conversation, right? So all these are organized chronologically, but if I wanted to respond to Amy Jo right there, I couldn't do it. So I'd have to post something at the end of the queue, if that makes sense. So that's a big limitation. The research that we've done is I really like Polkinghorne's framework that she uses, or he uses, I can't remember. Kind of a narrative analysis or analysis of narrative. So typically when you look at quantitative research, or qualitative research, sorry, it's kind of an analysis of narrative. It's deconstructive. They look at themes across all cases or all interviews, and then they try to pull out larger themes, right? So we did a study that was like that. We interviewed 18 students, and then we pulled out larger themes across all 18 students. When we got done, we thought, we're really missing the boat on some of this because we sampled some of these students for their specific characteristics, and those characteristics are lost in the analysis. So one thing that we did was a narrative analysis. So what you do with the narrative analysis, instead of breaking things apart in codes, you basically read the interview transcript, find a thread, kind of their narrative thread, and then you weave events together that will result in a story that can be read. So that's what I'm going to share with you here. So again, we're using VoiceThread, and what we're interested in is we sample some students based on their personal characteristics. And then, actually let me jump down here. So we had an introvert, an extrovert, an English language learner, and a student with low self-regulation. So we interviewed them about their ability to establish social presence or themselves as real people online using asynchronous video. And then we conducted a narrative analysis. So essentially we took the interview transcript and then we wove the events together based on a narrative thread that we recognized. So this was a result of that. Does that make sense? So let me share with you kind of the narratives. I always have my wife read my papers, so I kind of like proofread them. This was the first paper where she said, I didn't hate it. So, hopefully you guys don't hate it. Yeah. For her, it really is. So, that's actually goes to the other side. Disabled didn't quite work. So, let's do this. So we've got 4 narratives. I'm going to put you in groups. And look at that, you're at 4 tables. That's perfect. So why don't you guys take the extrovert? You guys will have the introvert. English language learners, and then you'll have the learner with low self-regulation. So go ahead and read them. You can read them aloud or to yourself, and then get together and ask yourself, how did asynchronous video impact their ability to establish social presence? And did their learner characteristics influence that at all?
What's the question?
So when you get done in your groups, just talk about how are they able to
Sorry, I'm still reading.
use asynchronous video? How did video impact their experience in the course, especially their ability to convey themselves as real people and establish social presence in the course?
She talked about that. I think it helped her.
So what class was this?
Everybody was there.
Which is different from 286.
Actually, it's 287.
Okay.
So all of them came from 287 except for the English language.
If you hear something.
287 is LED, 286 is secondary.
So it's the same kind of how to use technology in your classroom.
Yeah, same types of discussions that we're using.
And are these are online classes now?
Well, they were blended, so
Well, yeah.
technically they use a bookend blend.
I mean, it
They
has
met
a
on the
potential
first
to make
class,
more
and
introverted
everything else is
because
online.
if you could just live in that computer
Yeah.
world and never step out of it.
Wow.
But the
And is
fact
that
that she
for all the
did, she said that she
287
made a
classes
goal
now, or is that?
Now they're more blended, so they meet like
bit
4
more
times
like
during the
present
semester.
period.
Okay.
Whereas if you were in a
Because I
normal
took that
class,
class, you know.
Oh, you did?
tenured into
Oh,
something,
yeah,
you
that's
might
right.
not even want to make
That's
that
probably
connection.
pre-Dr. Graham, right?
He was teaching him all
Oh, he
this.
was.
And Rich Clark.
We should talk
Squad,
about the fact
yeah.
that
Cool.
using
And
the
request was
video
teaching it.
is better than writing text just
Well, that's
because
so
Oh,
you
cool.
get to just see more
Right.
who's
Sorry,
talking.
are you ready?
Yes.
You read fast, actually.
No, I don't.
In Portuguese.
It's a valuable resource.
That's perfect.
Probably for
Well, no, that's not good, because I did academic
I
study.
haven't read it.
I mean, it might be different.
Not quite like that.
I never
dominated classes.
No matter how many classes you watch, they were all Portuguese.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not an extra.
So we're talking about how the video
You want to
particularly helped, right?
Helped or hurt the quality of discussion or ability to be a real interaction.
Well, I think for her it helped.
Yeah, I
And as
saw
many
that
times
she
as
was
you
positive toward it because she had more concerns in writing
I don't think extroverts necessarily
Yeah.
try
and she had to think over and over in the writing, but in the video it was more easy to talk and interact, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is, like, it seems like the interaction in the writing was more like
Anything else?
checks on a checklist.
Yeah.
Which is not that kind of authentic, deep interaction
No.
that you want. So even if the number of interactions may have been the same for all we know, I mean, we don't know how quantity changed just from this narrative, but at least the student's perception of the motivation behind the interaction changed in their affective experience with that.
Yeah, I mean, she was really kind of efficiency oriented, right? Like, how do I get this done really fast? I don't like to write because busy work. I gotta spell, I gotta edit, I gotta, I just want to get in there and say my thing. One thing that I thought was interesting is that she didn't really care about her peers, right? It's like, I don't care what they have to say.
Yeah, not interested.
Yeah, so,
She was interested in getting the job done.
just get it over with.
And that was easy and fast.
Mhm.
She also recognised.
Yeah, so it almost like she could portray herself as a real person better. And I was her teacher actually, and looking at her videos, she had a lot of social presence and like, she was talking with her hands and like she was animated, and so she really had that social presence. But it sounds like she didn't really care. I mean, it was all busy work for her.
So she had different
Totally
tools
Yeah.
other than what you had
in a
mind
class
for
you
the
might
other
want to give a comment, but by the time one
Yeah.
person is
So,
done and the next person
how did she get the label
you're off the
extrovert?
topic, do you know what I mean? Because I've often felt like that.
I
wanted to say
identified her as
something,
an
but I can't
extrovert.
And why did you use extrovert, introvert, English language learner? I mean, why, as opposed to
And if
like,
you're sure you're not on the right track and you think, still come on out and ask this
like-
question or make this comment.
like extrovert, introvert are the Myers-Briggs?
Off.
Right.
Why not judger
When you're
versus
writing it out,
perceiver,
you could
or
be listening to
intuitive
it.
versus?
yeah.
Things the
I mean,
same way, and
why
that's
that
why
particular
we're
distinction? Do you have some theoretical reason
Yeah.
to say that?
Basically, the review and the framework, that's what I was saying. So I looked at how people,
make the comment.
so I looked at text-based communication
Who decided
and
not
try
to.
to find the literature that talks
Yeah.
about
Yeah,
the different types of people
absolutely.
and how text impacts their
This is
ability to
obviously
interact.
something who's trying
And those
to-
are the terms that I kind of saw in the literature. So I don't really know what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Myers-Briggs?
No, not Myers-Briggs.
Well, yeah. I was
The
gonna say
judge.
Judger
trying
versus
other
perceiver?
things as well.
That's
She
just
actually made it
because the
specific.
Myers-Briggs is 4 dichotomous options.
Oh, yeah.
That you get grouped into a 4x4,
It wasn't
16
an issue,
box
then.
matrix. So
Uh-huh.
like you can be an introvert or an extrovert. That's one. And that decision puts you in one half, one
yeah.
quadrant. And then you can be
She wasn't honest to make it hard. So you can do things
intuitive or
quite smart
think
on it.
intuitive
Yeah, like I guess I wonder how.
or sensory, intuitive sensory learner, kind of like more hands-on, more theoretical, and then feeler or a thinker, how you, your decision-making process, and then perceiver versus judger, which is like how you organize your
What's that,
time.
to make a goal, do you mean?
Do you
To be
have to relax first before you
Right.
work, or do you work first so that you can?
Yeah, no. So I
So you didn't see any of that.
I didn't even look at that.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of looking at the literature, and
I was just.
I didn't see people didn't really refer to them. So that's something that I should really look at.
Being an English language learner and low self-regulation, because those categories
Are
seem
kind
kind
of
of arbitrary.
all over the place.
Yeah, they're all over. They're
Right.
flowing from lots of.
Right.
Curious. Okay.
The waves are.
She's taking them.
Okay, let's kind of bring it together. We got 4 minutes. I'm just going to start. So just so you know, with the literature, so I did a. Jered had some really good questions over here, like why did you pick these things? They kind of seem over the map, like as far as grouping students. Essentially, what I did was I looked at the literature with text-based communication online, like discussion boards, and these were the categories that I saw come up repeatedly. But Jered made a good point that there's other frameworks that could be used, and I think that's perfect for future research. So, collaboration, Jered.
Yeah.
So in the literature, they basically found that face-to-face extroverts turn into online introverts because they don't have the writing skills or the reflective skills to participate in text. Did you guys see that with Gina? Did she become an online introvert?
Go ahead.
Sorry. I think she was more interested in getting her work done rather than communicating and interacting with her peers. She had different goal in using the video other than the other students or the idea of using the video anyway.
Yeah, she was all about efficiency. So you heard her say, I don't like writing, right? It's busy work. I don't, does it need to end in a period or whatever? Like she doesn't care about grammar. She cares about getting her ideas out there. So, and getting it done. Like she didn't really care what her peers thought or anything like that. So for her, she could establish her social presence, but she still wasn't reflective enough to really participate fully in the conversation. It was a one-way thing for her, right? So then if we switch to introverts over here, what can you tell me about Christine?
I think she became more of an extrovert. She made it a goal to comment on classes, and she liked it because she was able to think about it and reflect on it before she made the comment.
Yeah, and how long would she reflect? Did you?
Quite a while, I think.
Yeah, like hours.
Yeah, a couple of hours later, she said she would put something on, and also if she didn't like the sound of it or she thought it sounded stupid, she would erase it and start again.
Yeah, yeah. So she was selected because she was very, very quiet. I mean, even when she spoke, very soft-spoken, face to face, but online, she wasn't that way. And we found that she really did become an expert, which is interesting because the literature and face-to-face text, online text communication, basically says that one of the reasons why introverts can participate more online is the lack of fidelity. But for her, the fidelity didn't really matter, right? She enjoyed the fidelity almost. She liked seeing her peers, and she felt like she was communicating in a different way with video. So we're gonna have to end. Sorry. So yeah.
I want them to be able to ask you some questions.
Sure. Do we have time?
Yeah, we'll take that. What questions do you have about the research that Jered has done?
Yeah.
So, since we didn't get to the end, I'm just curious, are you working towards coming up with your own framework or your own model, like Moore's extended model of interactions between parent-learner and all these other things?
Yeah.
What are you looking to go for here?
So we try to add those two types of interaction, learner-parent and parent-instructor. There are other people like Anderson, if you're interested in it. Anderson identified all types of interaction, like instructor-instructor interaction, content-content interaction. He basically said these are all the possible types. We're trying to add our 2 cents, but more importantly, it's what do those interactions mean and how can it impact student engagement. So I'm less interested in adding to Moore's than adding to Garrison's community victory framework. Does that make sense? Yeah.
With that, my question kind of stems from from your student engagement triangle. Is there a particular reason why you would not include student engagement as something that influences student engagement? I don't know if that makes any sense.
You mean peer engagement or?
No, like their own
like
choice
their
to engage.
personal.
So, for example, in Christine, she made it a goal to engage.
Yeah.
And is there a way that might interact with parent engagement and with teacher engagement? The way that the student decides to engage, how that also mediates the others.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump up to here. That's been a critique of this framework as well, that they basically call it learner presence. So it's the characteristics of choices that they're making will impact social presence and cognitive presence. And Garrison actually came out like last month. It's available online, but that's it, where he basically looked at metacognition for the first time with this. So we're not there yet with the ACE framework, but I think as the framework evolves, just like as this framework has evolved, they kind of turn to that. I kind of see us looking at that down the line, but not right now.
Jered, I'd like you to briefly share with them your experience in seeking employment.
What do you want to know?
All the details, man. It's such a lurid tale. It's awesome.
I'm kind kind of stressed out right now actually because I got campus visits. So what they normally do is they have applicants and they'll have like 80 applicants, right? And then they'll pick 3 or like 10 or so to interview over the phone or however many they choose. And then they invite 3 out to campus. So I've made that cut to the campus visit 3 times. So I've gone to 3 different schools across country. And then you do things like this, you present and then you teach a class. And it's kind of stressful. Like I was sitting there breakfast and I thought it was just casual, no problem. And they're asking me questions, you know, just casual questions. And then a guy pulls out a notepad and starts taking notes on what I'm saying. I was like, wow, this is for real. Like, this is crazy. So it's basically a job interview all day. And you're just exhausted. Like, you get back to the room and you're just like, oh, I'm done. I got job offers from those 3 schools. And after a lot of prayer and visits to the temple, we decided not to accept any of them. So we're actually, you look like my wife. So we're kind of back to square one again, and going through that process. There's a few openings that we were really excited about. That it's not like college signing day, you know, where you can accept offers and then on one day you pick. So they offer you the job and say, we need to know in 3 days. And I just didn't feel like those were the opportunities we're looking for, and I don't know where we're going to end up. I know my mom has a nice basement, so maybe that's where we'll end up. But it's a stressful thing. I don't know.
So what advice do you have to these students?
Prepare. I can only speak to faculty positions, so I know that some of you are looking for that. They open really early. Like they will open in August, some of them, and then they'll have their candidates picked by December. So if you miss that curve, some of those will already have closed before you even have a chance to think about it. So I could have pushed through my program and finished, I don't know if this is the advice that I should be telling them, but I could have finished last year, but I decided to stick around another year. And I wrote for a grant, the Graduate Studies grant, which is great if you're at that point where you're thinking of your dissertation. I know that, who else got that? Yeah, Holt, Dr. Holt, right? Dr. Holt got that, and I thought no way would I get it, but he met me in the lab and said, I did it, why don't you try it? So I wrote it up and got funding that allowed me to stay another year and really continue my research with Open High School of Utah, which is great. So yeah, look for those opportunities. Apply for awards. That helps a lot. But really the currency is publications. So when I'm talking with people, that's what they like, is that I have some publications on my vita.
How many first authors do you have?
4 articles and 2 book chapters.
Awesome.
So look for those opportunities, and 3 of those was just teaching the class and for projects in the classes I was taking. So I used that time to kind of analyze the data and write the article. So also collaboration is good with faculty members.
What questions